Welcome back to the Accountable podcast. I'm Ian Tenenbaum, founder of Accountable, and with me, as always, the British accented Josh Budd.
Hi, I am the British accented Josh Budd. Happy to be here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I should say mate, not because it's
Mate.
funny. I call a lot of people Bud. I say to a lot of people, "Hey, Bud," and for you, it's like kind of not. It's like too on the nose. It's too silly. So I should call you mate. Hey, mate.
I don't think I like it. I think it sounds weird from your mouth.
Hey, mate. Um,
All right, mate.
well, before we get too distracted, why don't we talk about something that has come up a lot with clients lately, and it's definitely something I work on daily, weekly, forever. Is this wrestling with the idea of consistency and how perfectionism and it all kind of blends together with our ability to start stuff. And I realized one of the reasons why this is that area is so challenging is because consistency, the idea of doing something regularly, requires us to do it even once in the first place, and that has a lot of challenge. So it's often not about the consistency. It's about, if we go backtrack, it's about just starting and doing the thing in the first place. And there's no one, and the reason why a lot of things don't work for us with ADHD is because there's not one reason why that is. There's not only like a silver bullet that applies to everyone. Like some of my clients, it's maybe a little rejection sensitivity, or perfectionism. Some it's too many thoughts and they're overwhelmed. They don't know which one to start with. Some it's just a planning. It's they're flustered by not knowing where to start. So how have you approached consistency, and what does consistency even mean to you nowadays? And what are,
Yeah.
well, let's start with how you view the topic, because I have a lot of thoughts, but I'd love to hear from you first.
Somebody who, at least in the past year, I've developed a really, really strong sense of consistency. And that is the only way that I've been able to achieve so much and progress so much. And, by no means am I a millionaire, but, I think my performance is quite high compared to a lot of other people, and then more compared to people with ADHD. And I think that the reason for this, arguably, is that very early on, I realized that you cannot rely on self control and you cannot rely on discipline. You need to put in things in place that remove the need for discipline and remove the need for self control.
Right,
Very early on, I
right.
realized
Like
that.
the forethought or the foresight, or being able to think ahead and make it set up so it's easier. Which, again, that's something that us with ADHD struggle with.
Mhm.
Maybe you
Yeah,
having skills in medicine since you're younger helped you build that muscle.
it's more about removing the question from the equation and
Like the
making it,
decision, you mean?
putting things in place so that, removing the decision. So rather than having to say, am I going to do this? Am I not? When you do that, when you rely on that so many times, the demon on your shoulder wins and says, no, not today. You justify things in weird ways by saying, I've had a long day, or I only got 7 hours sleep last night, so I won't do this today because I need to accommodate for it. And by putting in the right things in place, and we could have a whole conversation about systems, etc. Like I always say on here, I'm a systems geek, but I think you need those sorts of things in place always, to things like cues, etc. To make sure that consistency is not a question of do I have enough discipline or willpower, and it's more about just this is just what I do every day. There's many things that come into it, like identity. This is something
Well,
I do.
let me give an example, I guess. Like
Go for it. Go for it.
I wanted to do a podcast for the first year and a half of this business, but it never felt like the highest priority. And there's other things, but when you and I started working together, instead of just, spending weeks or months, talking about creating a podcast and making a plan and all this stuff and figuring out the service and the platform. Like we just said, okay, we're just going to schedule a time every single week so we never have to think about it again. We both just show up and we talk, and then we just deal with the rest later. So putting that commitment in place along the way, I notice how many times I want to, cancel the time or, see if there's a different, we're using Riverside, maybe we want to use a different service for it, or is the quality not good enough, or do we need an intro? And like all of those things start to hijack our, because they're all fun and exciting and they're all creative,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like building that muscle to, or making us showing up and doing it more important than the quality or the platform or any of those other things. Like, how do you see that? Because I know you and I have talked about, like, do we switch platform? Is it good enough quality? Like, are we putting it in the right places? Do we have a thumbnail? Like, we get, it's so easy to get lost in
I
that.
think,
So
yeah, I think this is where the idea of perfectionism comes into the conversation, and I think particularly for us with ADHD, it's got to be a mantra for you that done is always easier and better in many instances than perfect. Just getting it done to whatever it is, the simplest version of that is so 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 important. And in everything
well,
that we've done, I think
oh,
go on.
I was gonna say on that topic, the one of the ways I've started, I'm definitely not, the best Jedi master yet, but one of the ways I've started approaching what you just said is by shifting the, like, where perfectionism comes in. So
Mm-hmm,
instead of wanting to think that, let's get the podcast everything perfect before we put it out, I've kind of shifted to, in order to make it perfect, we probably need to do this every week for a year.
mm-hmm,
And until then, we won't, like, things will come. So trusting that, like, by doing it messy or sloppy over and over, and the repetition of it like actually is more the path to the perfectionism. So when you realize you're slowing yourself down by the details, you can
mm-hmm.
remind yourself, well, those will get better over time. Like, easier
Definitely.
said than done, but I feel like that's where we get stuck. Like,
Definitely. I think the starting point for me, a rule I generally use for myself is that I'm happy with something to put it out there into the world when I'm 80% happy with it. And from then on, once you compound those iterative improvements, if you're starting at 80% and you're doing, which, if you look at Pareto's principle, generally takes 20% of the time. If you were to try and reach 100% perfection, you're going to spend 80% more time on it. So in terms of investment to reward, it just doesn't make sense. Like, you can spend so much less time to get a really strong baseline, and then, like you said, iteratively improve. And I think
oh,
another side of things comes down to just brutal prioritization of stuff and saying to yourself, like you said, you're pushing down the line when perfection comes. So the prioritization aspect of that is, when do I actually need to make sure this is perfect? And like you said, we need to discuss about, are we going to use Riverside? Do we need to do this? Do we need to do that? Yes, but not now. And you always talk about this so much. Maybe you could
so
talk about it
what
bonus.
you just said is the main, like, the big takeaway here is, like, when do I have to make sure it's perfect, and shifting that to, there isn't one time or one thing that makes it perfect. That's where
Mm-hmm,
we get lost. We think there's this like starting point. And I think, just reflecting on my own experience, this has been built over a lifetime of carelessness, impulsivity, sloppiness. And we start, as we get older and become adults with ADHD, start internalizing this mantra that I don't want to keep doing that. I don't want to keep being sloppy. I don't want to keep being reckless. I want to start doing things right the first time, right? And we get stuck on that. So then the idea of doing something, not fully perfect becomes like so like, so like shameful, like, here I go again, being careless, sloppy. So we like hold on to that. So I've had to like let go of it and say, okay, us putting out a podcast every week that's maybe a little sloppy or isn't perfect or is fuzzy or the sound's not, that's not a reflection of like just how I am always. It's actually the opposite. It's that now I am getting better at I'm getting stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing how things over time, like we work on the workshop that I do, and
Yeah.
I've done it 10 times now, and I still keep, iterating on it. There is no perfect. And on that one, Russell Brunson, the ClickFunnels guy, was talking to Ali Abdal and said, before he made his automated, he ran it live like 100 times to figure out what works. So I think shifting our focus about consistency to like consistency being the path to perfection in a way versus perfection being first in order to be, yeah, we can get heady about this, but it's about being comfortable with uh things not being exactly how we see them in our head, which is really hard.
Yeah. Uh, I think something that you mentioned at the start as well, which ties in really well with that, with being comfortable with putting things out there that aren't 100% perfect, comes down to rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, RSD, that
Yeah.
sort of stuff, and a lack of confidence, and maybe based on past experiences of things
Right.
where things haven't gone well, that often holds us back, and it becomes, maybe you have something small that you get rejected about, but that then dwells and grows and it becomes its own beast, and you start having irrational levels of RSD and
Right.
irrational levels
Right.
of fear about things that aren't in line with actually how bad the rejection is. For example, if you put something out that's 8% done and you ask for some feedback and someone gives you a bit of constructive feedback, it might be really small, but it feels like an absolute stake through the heart for you because you've let this beast grow. So I think, yeah, there comes an element
Well,
in, like you said, so many things impact it, and
the
yeah,
the
aiming to come into terms with
percentage,
that.
yeah, the percentage thing you're touching on is huge, because I had a business coach I worked with for a few years, and one of the things that really stuck with me was this idea of like pulling the trigger, getting something out or getting something done when it's like over 70%, or even with decision fatigue, like, is there a 70% chance that it'll work? Okay, try it. And
Mm-hmm.
we get stuck on this like elusive mythical 100% that'll never come, and it keeps us stuck. And being able to be comfortable with putting things out at 70-80% requires like a new shift in our nervous system to tolerate that.
Yeah, I really, really agree with what you just said. That especially the decision side of things. I think something that plagues us with ADHD, decision paralysis, having some sort of like set limit in your head that says, am I 70% sure that this will work? Am I 80% sure that this is better? Fine, put it out. And having those things that you've predefined to yourself in advance is so, so, so important. And it's
Yeah,
hard
or
to
time
justify sitting down
constraints.
and putting those in place. Exactly, got time constraints as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like we set a certain amount of time each week for this, and we don't spend more time on it right now. And it's
Mm-hmm.
because it has a certain place in its importance or priority, right? It's worth an hour a week for us to sit down and record it and put it out, but it's not necessarily worth 4 or 5 hours to like strategize it, script it. It's just not at that point. Maybe in the future it will, but right now it has its place, right? And staying within that helps us ignore like, oh yeah, I want to change this and the camera settings and this, but that would put us outside of our like hour a week, which isn't really worth it right now. We
Mm-hmm.
do have to wrap
I also
up.
believe.
Yeah,
Okay, go on.
last
Go on.
thought.
Let me say this actually. I also believe that you actually need to put things out to achieve perfection. You have to put things out and get the most important thing, arguably, in the business world with ADHD is data. Like, I have a
Yeah,
very
exactly.
specific story about this where I had a co founder who I worked with, and we used to go round and round in circles about this is a better idea, no, this is a better idea, no, this is a better idea. And ultimately, they were both 85% of the way towards perfection, but we just never put it out to get the data to make that decision to understand what was perfect. Because most of the time we ruminate in our own minds about what's the perfect
Yeah,
headline, what's
you
the
just
perfect
gave
this.
me you
Just
just
put it
gave
out there
me
and test it.
you just gave me the best analogy, right? Like imagine two partners are opening a restaurant and they want to design the menu and they go back and forth on pen
Mm-hmm.
and paper about the menu and this one's better and that one's better and this one's better and this is my idea and this sauce and this ingredients and they can't agree at all and someone would come in and say, "Are you guys crazy? Like, you don't even know what any of this shit tastes like. Like, what are you talking about? You're just talking about words on paper. Why don't you make some of this shit and then see how it tastes and then decide then, right? Like, that's
Absolutely.
what we're doing. We're getting stuck on the plan and we have no data. That's the biggest. That's thanks for bringing that. That's like the biggest point here is we need that repetition to get data. Data is how we get to
Mm-hmm.
perfection and it
Yeah,
all comes full
definitely.
circle. Awesome. We got to run. We got a co-working with the community. Gonna go get shit done. And
Awesome.
I guess we'll see you next week. And hopefully each week it gets a little better, just a little better each
Just a
time.
little bit. Just a little bit. Maybe soon we'll be perfect, but probably
All
not.
right. We'll see you guys.
Cheers. See ya.